Welcome everyone to this webinar for New Zealand employers. My name is Fabian Maisonneuve. I'm a licensed immigration advisor at New Zealand Shores, and always a pleasure to welcome back my colleagues and also advisors in Hamilton, Charlotte Stockman and Frederick Pinard-Duranda. Today, we are really going to be focusing on the recent changes for New Zealand employers. So as no doubt you've seen recently, we've received some major updates from Immigration New Zealand last couple of days. And these changes do have a substantial impact on several categories of migrants, work visa holders, some of their pathways to residency as well. We're not going to get into the changes that affect the migrants so much today. This webinar is really for New Zealand employers. We actually have another video posted on YouTube, which focuses on migrant changes. Just in a nutshell, the recent changes do impact the occupations listed under the green list, naturally impact on accredited employee work visa requirements, namely the skill levels for different occupations, but also English requirements for the first time for work visa holders. So if you'd like to look into this for your staff, migrant staff, I'd invite you to have a look at that video on our YouTube channel. More specifically, the recent changes for New Zealand employers have to do with compliance. Some additional checks will be required or performed by Immigration New Zealand. We're seeing the franchisee category of accreditation being phased out sometime this year, and some additional requirements in terms of notifying ANZ, for example, of your staff leaving employment, migrant staff, and some rather big changes in terms of job checks and advertising requirements. So let's get into this in detail. So Charlotte, can you tell us a bit about the additional compliance requirements mandated by Immigration New Zealand?
Yeah, so for the vast majority of employers who have become accredited since the policy was introduced in May 2022, you will have either been granted a 12 or 24-month accreditation. So for most people, these accreditations will start to expire towards the end of this year if they aren't already. So as part of that process, if you wish to continue to hire more migrant staff in the future, you will actually need to go through a process of applying for re-accreditation. If you don't foresee yourselves needing to hire more migrant staff in the next 12 months, then that's absolutely fine. You don't actually have to apply for re-accreditation. Anyone who's currently on an AEWV or an accredited employer work visa can actually remain working for you, even if you opt to let that accreditation lapse. However, again, if you are looking to hire new staff, then that re-accreditation process is really important. You will also need to maintain accreditation if any of those migrant staff are looking to apply for residency. So if you've got anyone that is perhaps in the next 12 months becoming eligible for residence and they need to go through that process, then you will need to actually renew that accreditation. As part of that re-accreditation process, Immigration New Zealand may undertake compliance checks, and these could actually also happen while your accreditation renewal is being processed, and it may also happen when a migrant applies for residency. So part of that compliance check, Immigration New Zealand will look to make sure that you've been paying your staff the correct rate. So if a visa states that a person must be paid at a certain threshold or above, Immigration New Zealand will check that. They will also check that a person has been working a minimum of 30 hours per week, because that's what Immigration New Zealand determined as full-time employment. So if you are found to not be compliant, that can actually affect your ability to hire migrants in the future as well. So it's really important that as an employer, you ensure that you are doing everything you can for your migrant staff to remain compliant with their work visas. As accredited employers, you do also have to undertake employment modules. So there are employer versions and employee versions. Some employers may not even be aware that these are a thing, but Immigration New Zealand, as part of that re-accreditation process, asks you to make a declaration to say that both you and your employees have been doing this. If Immigration New Zealand do then go on to seek evidence and this isn't the case, then you may deem to be not compliant with your accreditation. So it is really important that you are maintaining all of these factors, because that what you have declared you will do as an accredited employer. If you're not sure about whether or not you have been compliant, we've got questions or concerns about a particular situation that may have transpired for you or an employee in the last 12 months, or even if there's been some changes to their employment or hours or pay, we're more than happy for people to reach out to us at employers@newzealandshores.com. That will come through to one of us and we'll be able to answer those questions and give you guidance where necessary.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Yes, we've definitely seen some increase in those compliance checks. Another requirement that we've seen come through is the need for an employer to notify immigration when an accredited employer work visa holder terminates their employment. If they have any less than 1 month before the expiry of their visa at the time they leave, you now as an employer must notify immigration, so we can let you know what that process looks like. Along the lines of all these compliance requirements we've just talked about, your reaccreditation may be in jeopardy if you have failed to notify immigration of an employee leaving. What's changing on the accreditation front, Frederick?
Yes, so Immigration New Zealand has seemingly announced that franchisee accreditation will end sometime in 2024. So what that means for franchisee employers, well, you will still be able to apply for either standard accreditation, which is where you have 5 or less migrant staff in your business. The second option is high volume, and that's 5 or more migrant staff in your business, or the triangular or labour hire accreditation category. So that would just depend on your business circumstances, and just like with everything else in this webinar, happy for you guys to reach out to us if you had any queries.
Thank you very much. Now, getting into some rather more complex matters, we've seen a radical shift with immigration in the last 18 months, giving quite a lot of free rein for employers to determine what was needed to do a job. And this has shifted back to policy that was in effect pre-COVID, essential skills, where ANZSCO, which is a classification of occupation, held much more importance. Immigration sort of has come back to that system to determine the skill level of work visas or occupations. Can you talk a little bit about this, please, Charlotte?
Yeah, so ANZSCO is, like Fabian mentioned, a system that basically orders occupations from skill level 1 through to skill level 5. So typically a skill level 1 occupation is what we call a high level occupation and often requires at least 5 years work experience or a bachelor's degree. Those skill level 5 occupations, in contrast, often require no experience or qualifications in order to be deemed skilled. Immigration's now moving back into a space that is similar to what we had pre-COVID, so sort of 2019 and before, where an applicant for a visa actually had to demonstrate that they met ANZSCO requirements. So if it's a skill level 1 occupation, often you need to demonstrate 5 years work experience or that you hold that bachelor's degree. But now what is slightly different is that for skill level 4 and 5 occupations that typically wouldn't require any work experience or qualification evidence, Immigration New Zealand is now mandating that everyone be able to provide a minimum of 3 years work experience to show that they are actually skilled for that role. So if you're hiring someone like a building labourer, for example, you do need to be able to show that they have 3 years relevant work experience. It does mean that employers are no longer able to just hire people with no work experience, because obviously that's something that they should be really offering to New Zealanders rather than migrants. So they are really enforcing that.
Previously, I think employers have come accustomed to having the entirety of the requirements left for them to determine themselves, and immigration would accept that as part of the job check process, and the migrant will be able to get the visa with no issue. But this time around, for any new applications, as mentioned, the migrant would have to meet the minimum skills threshold of either 3 years relevant work experience with sufficient evidence from the third party, so most likely their previous employers or their tax records from their relevant authority. Or apart from that, to meet the requirements, they would need to hold a recognised qualification at level 4 or higher in the New Zealand qualifications framework. Now, immigration will consider any bachelor degrees to have met the requirements of the 3 years work experience or the level 4 qualification or above. So if your migrant staff do hold a bachelor degree from back home, that could be beneficial for your a migrant getting the work visa moving forward. Now, despite that, the skills threshold will be considered to be met if the migrant is offered twice the median wage, or the migrant holds occupational registration for that role, or that role that you're offering is within the green list and those requirements are met.
They are, as part of the skill level 4 and 5 occupations, there's an impact on the advertising requirements as well. So you do need to actually now be able to demonstrate that you've advertised for 3 weeks rather than the 2, which has been standard for job checks, I guess, for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. Another additional requirement for employers looking to fill a skill level 4 or 5 role, on top of having to advertise for 21 days instead of 14, is now the need to engage with Work and Income New Zealand regarding the vacancy. Work and Income New Zealand will then have to provide confirmation that they have no viable candidates, and this confirmation must be provided as part of the job check application alongside the evidence you have advertised. So they're very much going back to a system where they are really dialing in to make sure that there are no New Zealand citizens or residents available for that role. You can't hire people unless they are able to demonstrate they're skilled, which means that Kiwis effectively aren't missing out on those job opportunities which may have been available through them. There's also now a change in how long of a duration a person can be in New Zealand as well. So again, those skill level 4 or 5 occupations, initially they will now be granted a visa for 2 years. The end of that 2-year period, their employer can submit a new job check and they can be granted a further 12 months, which gives them a total of 3 years in New Zealand. At the end of that 3-year period, they do then have to leave New Zealand for 12 months and return to elsewhere in the world and effectively have a stand down period. So again, it's basically making sure that people in those lower skilled occupations aren't settling fully in New Zealand, and making sure that Immigration New Zealand is meeting the best needs of New Zealand citizens and residents as well, by ensuring that, you know, those roles are available to New Zealanders where it is appropriate. Again, obviously, if those New Zealanders aren't available for those roles, you can still hire from offshore. You do just have to go through those extra steps to make sure you're demonstrating that you've done everything you can to hire within New Zealand first. Skills level 1 to 3 at this stage are still able to obtain 5-year visas, so there's been no change on that front. However, at the end of that 5 years, if that person hasn't applied for residence, they will actually need to return home. So we're no longer in a space where people can continuously apply for work visa after work visa after work visa. They are making sure that they really are pushing people down those pathways to residency if they have them.
In terms of the duration of accredited employer work visa, the duration will be determined by several things. The skill level of the occupation under ANZSCO. 1, 2, 3, largely unaffected, and a migrant may get a visa for up to 5 years. 4, 5, skill level 4, 5, it may be 2 or 3 years. The salary or the hourly rate will also determine how long the visa is, whether the role is on the green list, and also when the visa was applied for. There is a bit of a transition period for people having applied for their visa between June last year and last Monday, early April 2024. Thank you, Frederick. Just to wrap up on the work visa requirements, not really the employer's concern in any way, but for the first time, Immigration New Zealand is actually introducing English proficiency requirement for work visas. That's usually only for residency, but this time around for, once again, lower skilled roles, skill level 4 and 5 only. Migrant workers will need to provide an English test unless they're coming from an English-speaking country like the United States, Canada, the UK, or the Republic of Ireland, or have a tertiary qualification from one of these countries. Partners and dependent children are unaffected, and they would only still have to provide an English test under residency instructions. Lastly, perhaps a couple of words about whether any of these changes have an impact on the variation of conditions. Frederick?
Yeah, sure. So, as mentioned by my colleagues previously, some of the migrants applying for work visas may be required to provide English language test results. However, for the purposes of varying an accredited employer work visa, or otherwise known as a job change, thankfully, English requirements are not necessary at that stage. However, in terms of varying the conditions and changing work for a different employer or a different job or location, that may have an impact on the maximum visa duration. As mentioned by Charlotte earlier, that could result in a shorter time period on a work visa, so 2 years initially and up to a maximum maybe of 3 years. So that's something that you can more than happy for us to contact us about and discuss. And then obviously meeting other requirements for that role, such as a median wage or a substantial match to the role, and amongst other things. But certainly anybody going through that process, you're more than welcome to put them our way, and we can assess their situation individually.
Thank you, everyone. This wraps up our webinar for employers in the lights of the recent immigration changes of April 2024. This no doubt will raise a lot of questions for your staff, current or future recruits. If you have any questions, you're already working with one of our advisors at New Zealand Shores, we recommend you reach out to them directly because they are familiar with your company background and possibly a lot of your current migrant staff. Otherwise, you can email employers@anzshores.com and one of us will pick this up and respond to you. Thank you so much for attending, and we hope to hear from you. Cheers. Thank you, guys.